Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Geog 1140. It's humans' role in changing the face of planet Earth. It's the 27th of March. We are on Thursday of week 11. We're getting down to close to the end of class. This is our last day we're going to be doing in Unit 2 for test number 2. We're going to be doing biodiversity loss and transportation today. We'll also talk a little bit about the third position paper. We've looked at it already. If you haven't done it, please get started. It's due today. We also, like I said, have test number 2 coming up next week. So if you haven't done the quizzes or any of the assignments so far, please do those beforehand because the quizzes, again, are going to be your practice for your test. The test banks come from the same questions that the quizzes do. And so it'll just give you an extra, more low stakes opportunity for you to practice those questions before the test because they're the exact same, right? There's not quite as many of them from each chapter, but it's the same. It's like instead of pool 10 out of 20, it's like pool 3 or 4 out of 20 for each chapter. Remember, this is not a cumulative test. It's not an exam if you care about those kind of taxonomic differences. But that basically just means that it's only going to be covering the sections since the last test. So that's going to be chapters 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So 10 through 17. If you haven't read those chapters, I'd start on it. If you're real far behind, again, I always push it, but listen to the podcast. I put a podcast for biodiversity and transportation. I listened to them in the gym this morning. I feel so much smarter now just by listening to them. So I encourage you. That's a great thing to do if you haven't got caught up in, or if you are have differential accessibilities. If you're more of an auditory learner than a visual learner, like some people like myself are. So there for you. Remember, third position paper is also going to be due pretty soon. We got 3 choices for this week. You got you got climate change, you got biodiversity, and waste and recycling are your 3 options. Remember, 3 choices for our 3 articles or videos for each. And Laura and I were just looking at the grading. We just finished grading position paper number 2, I feel like, just recently. But what we talked about it yesterday when we're going to be grading these, the things we're looking for, right, are that you did all 3 articles. Some people just do 2 and they think that they can write, the full 2 pages and they can just kind of like spread the rest out. Don't do that. Make sure you get all 3. The other thing that people often lose points for is there's really 2 parts for each of these readings or videos, right? There's a summary part, a paragraph or so, that lets me know that you read or watched the video, right? If you don't, then it's just you talking. The second part is your position. It's a position paper. It's right in the name. So we got to have a position. You got to take a stand on what you think, right? It's not just enough to be like, this video showed some polar bears. They were pretty sad because all their ice melted and they were so hungry. That's a summary, I guess, kind of what's going on. But really, you need to do something, right? I think that this, is a great. This video really illustrates maybe the issue of climate change, and I think that probably videos like this are a wake-up call that we all need to stop. I don't know, to switch to electric vehicles or something like that, right? Just give me some kind of opinion. Those are really what I'm looking for. 3 different articles or videos, a summary of what's going on, as well as opinions. Some people also write it out. Some people just do like the bullet points. Here's my 3-point summary. Here's my 3-point what to do. It kind of reminds me a little too much of what ChatGPT might be throwing out. So please just rewrite it and actually write it into paragraphs. So any questions about that? So we're looking for just 2 pages. It's not very much, right? 2 to 3 pages. You got 3 articles. That's less than a page for each one. I think you can do it. And at this point, you've done 3 of them, and there's only 4 throughout the course of the semester. So hopefully you got it pretty down by now. Again, we are approaching rapidly the end. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like we're still stuck here in the doldrums of March. But next time we meet on Tuesday for our review, it'll be the beginning of April. And once it gets to April, I feel like we are on the downhill because we got SRCC rolling in through next week and no class on Thursday. Then we got 3 weeks of working towards the end, only a couple more chapters, 5 more chapters. Warfare, natural disasters. We got energy production, mining, and then a wrap up, and we are all done with the class. That's pretty exciting. Yeah, a couple other things. 1 month from tomorrow, the 28th of April, is also the last day that we're accepting late work. Remember, late work does turn itself off after 3 weeks because you lose a letter grade every week because it's late. So if you had a B, or if you had an A, then it would be a B, then a C, then a D. And so after, well, on the 4th week, it would automatically be an F. But if you do have any of that late work, please turn it in. I had somebody being like, you open discussion board number 1. It's too far back at this point. So please try to stay caught up. Don't try to do the hero move where you turn in everything. I don't like to. The reason we do this is because we just get too many people who are like the last night before the class grades are due and graduation's the next day, and they're still frantically turning in papers. And I'm like, I want to go to sleep. So please just turn your stuff in early. That's why we have deadlines, not to be mean, but just because if you want to have grades turned back at a reasonable time, we need to keep everybody more or less on the same schedule. Okay, so we're almost getting close to done, right? We only have 4 position papers in this class. You only have 3 tests, and after next week, you will have done 3 out of the 4 position papers and 2 out of the 3 tests. The other thing that you still have coming up, you only got to 12 quizzes in this class as well. And after this week, you will have been done with 9 of 12, right? So the majority, by next week, the vast majority, not the vast, 3/4 of your points in this class will have been registered for your grade if you're turning everything in. So for some of you, that's real good because you can kind of, you're on a good trajectory towards an A, and others of you, it serves as a wake-up call to just start turning things in. Okay, so that's that. So we're going to do biodiversity today, and then we'll see how this goes. We might also have a little bit on transportation. Where did it go? There it is. Oh. Okay. So what do you think it means when I say biodiversity? This is like, you probably heard this in like high school class, bio class or something, or different organisms and ecosystems. Yeah, right. On an ecosystem level, it could be on a more specific area, like on an island, how much biodiversity is, or it could be on a bigger scale, on a continent-wide or a planet-wide scale, right? Like how much biodiversity is there on planet Earth compared to 100 years ago or 5,000 years ago or something, right? And so we're going to talk about biodiversity, why it's important, but primarily talking about some of the threats to biodiversity, what's going on, which causes things to go extinct, right? And this is, I remember this back from like, I don't know, 2nd or 3rd grade when I was like a little kid. They were like, oh, the animals are going extinct, right? The tigers are going extinct, the bears, the parrots, right? All these exotic animals are going extinct. And that seemed to be kind of the face of this like biodiversity loss, especially back in the kind of the 80s. But I think now it's changed more to like an ecosystems approach, right? Thinking big picture about not only what individual species, these charismatic megafauna like tigers and elephants, but how, even little things like krill or bugs or something like that, which we were like, who cares? But how this all fits together to make planet Earth basically run. Okay. So biodiversity has become increasingly important and is often kind of the face of like what we think of with like the environmental movement, at least traditionally in the 20th century, because people have noticed this for a long time, right? Like we think this is something we just discovered, but even in like the 17 and 1800s, people are starting to notice that a lot of these animals that used to be around are not anymore. And this goes back very far. Like people in Victorian England reading Homer and being like, kind of weird, they're talking about lions in Greece. Like we don't really seem to have those anymore. I wonder what happened, right? Or animals like the passenger pigeon, which were once so numerous that back in the early colonial days, people would complain about the pigeons flying over in such herds or flocks that they would blot out the sun and it would get dark. So they would just kind of randomly shoot up shotguns at them because they were annoyed at them, to the point where by the end of the 19th century that there's literally not any left in the whole world, right? And so people have noticed this for a very long time, but in recent decades, it's become much more rapid. And so the rate of extinction in endangered species has been threatened, but also our ability to do something about it, right? And we're going to take a look at some of these success stories, right? One of the things that I don't necessarily like maybe about how the textbook is written and kind of how the class seems to function is that it's kind of sad all the time. It's like, oh man, like Lauren calls it the after lunch sad class. Like we're gonna hear something terrible that humans have done to the earth today, right? Like, oh, it's climate change, oh, it's deforestation, or it's whatever. But I think biodiversity is one of those things that like we have seen some positive steps towards, right? Whether it's going from 500 breeding pairs of bald eagles in the 1960s or 70s when my parents were kids to 10,000 pairs today, or just a couple hundred alligators left in Florida in the 1960s to millions of them. You can't go anywhere without running into an alligator these days, right? So these things do seem to work if there is a will, right? And we'll talk about like what animals maybe get saved and which ones don't. Which ones do you think get saved? The cute ones, right? A panda. Oh, save a panda, right? Or a bald eagle. It's America. Versus like who cares about some fish, right? Or some frog, right? What's that gonna do? So there is this kind of disproportionate efforts put into certain species, but we'll look at this and think about like maybe how that might be overall pretty good, because even though it's focused on certain ones, maybe other people or other species get kind of brought along with it. Anyway, so we're going to talk about this, and one of the reasons that it is so important is because it is one of these human-driven changes. And often associated with that era we call the Anthropocene, right? The age of human domination. And we've talked about this a couple times. The Anthropocene is a geological term, right? Earth scientists to talk about when humans seem to take over as the dominant form of change or impact on planet Earth versus natural issues. And we can see this in a lot of different things, right? And we've talked about how before the climate has changed many times over the history of planet Earth. But in recent decades, humans have been the primary driver of this, right? And it's gone at an unprecedented rate. We've talked about it with wind erosion and soil degradation, right? We talked about this last time. Soil has been eroded since the beginning. Since there has been soil, it has been eroding. But in the last 100 or 200 years, right, it's been humans who have been driving this. And the impacts have gone from like, oh, this has always been happening to large scale impacts that are kind of unprecedented in their rapid advance. And biodiversity loss is another one of those. I know some of you have toddlers, and so we're probably all dinosaur experts in here. And we know that there has been mass extinctions in the past. There's actually been 5 past mass extinctions, right? And the dinosaurs wasn't even the worst of them. Other times, in the Cambrian, we see 90% of species lost, which is just kind of unfathomable. But scientists argue we are currently in the midst of a 6th grade extinction, but not one caused by volcanoes or by asteroids or things like that, but caused by people, right? We are causing this extinction. And so we're going to kind of look at this extinction level, this mass extinction and the loss of biodiversity in these different domains. And then we'll think about maybe, can we do something to save it? So when we talk about biodiversity, this often has this tendency to be focused, again, we talked about this just a second ago, on animals, especially cute ones, right? Save the whales, save the tigers, save elephants, right? I think we can all agree that's a pretty good thing, right? I don't think anybody in this class hates elephants. We all love elephants, right? But when it gets to be things like spiders or bugs, people are like, right? Or things that are harder to see, algae, save the algae, like who cares, right? Or krill. And so some of these things like get a lot more publicity or love than others, right? One of the problems with biodiversity though, and like measuring biodiversity loss, is that we don't actually know how many species there are on planet Earth. If you're a biologist in grad school, you can actually still go out there and discover a brand new species. That's cool, right? Put your name on it. And so it's really hard for us to talk about biodiversity loss, because biodiversity loss is always kind of like a percentage, right? We've lost 20% of cats, or we've lost 50% of bugs. But how can you do a percentage if you don't know what the original number is, right? Biodiversity, often we think of this as in animals, especially cute, cuddly, and charismatic megafauna, elephants and whales and cats and things like that. But it encompasses so much more, right? We talk about plants, we talk about ecosystems, we talk about algae and microscopic things and bugs, right? These are all kind of connected. And like I said earlier, we as people who are interested in saving the world have realized that in the last couple of decades that it's not enough just to save the elephants, right? If you save an elephant and you put them in a zoo, like that's great, but like they don't have a habitat, right? And elephants form part of this larger ecosystem in which they're trampling down areas, they're eating grass, right? They're prey for lions and things like that, right? They fit together in this big web. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, I'll show you the first video for today. Just kind of an overview of biodiversity and biodiversity loss, as well as some of the things that we might do to kind of pump the brakes on it a little bit. Let's take a look. Big overview video. We just watched a video on an overview of biodiversity loss. Let's talk a little bit more about it. So based on what you saw in the video, we talked about biodiversity. We've talked about this a little bit already, that it happens on a number of different scales, right? This could be on the species scale. This could be on the environment scale, the ecosystem scale, or even on the microscopic, like the gene scale, right? Even within a species projecting diversity within it. And this is often a problem, like when we talk about, oh, we're down to like the last 3 rhinos or something, right? Even if we do keep those animals alive and clone them or something, we've lost most of the genetic diversity within that species, which makes it really hard for it to bounce back. Okay, so yeah, it happens on a number of different scales, from like the microscopic to the individual to the ecosystem scale, but often it also happens on different temporal scales, right? We can talk about loss of creatures or animals in a local community, and we're going to take a look at England a little bit later in the PowerPoint, right? That people in England have noticed that over the last couple hundred or thousand years, they've lost a lot of creatures. Like, back in the Anglo-Saxon days, they talk about brown bears. We can see it in the literature. But there's no bears here in England anymore. Wonder what happened, right? Or wolverines. We see them kind of in the prehistoric era in Britain, but there's definitely no wolverines running around Britain now. What happened, right? They can also happen on larger and larger scales, and usually the larger scale we're talking about geographically, the longer the time span of extinction is or disappearance, right? Just because it takes longer for the last of everything versus to go away versus in a small pocket or a small island. Yeah, we talked about that. Lots of mass extinctions. The 6th is where we are currently. But again, the one that we're living through right now, the 6th mass extinction, the Anthropocene mass extinction, is kind of unprecedented, and it's very similar to something else, all the other kind of human impacts that we've talked about in this class. That this has been going on in the past, but when humans do it, it's just so much more, right? It's about 1,000 times the background rate of extinction, or the natural rate of extinction, right? This is how we know that it's like people doing this, and it's not just, oh, maybe some animals go extinct. Well, they do, but like not at the scale and the speed that we're seeing them go. Again, we've talked about the passenger pigeon. There used to be millions and millions of them, but now, by the early 1900s, there was only a few left in zoos, and they were all gone. We all probably know what that animal is. What's that? Yeah, it's a dodo, right? What happened to the dodo? Yeah, right. Like it didn't, it went extinct, but like we clubbed it to death, basically, right? They didn't have predators. No. Yeah, right. We show up on an island and the Mauritius, and there's these birds, and sailors are hungry, and these birds walk up and bop, 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 and people hit them on the head with a stick. And it's a population that was only on a small island. An island, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but island species tend to be particularly vulnerable to extinction and habitat loss and overhunting because they are like on a specific island. We also see them in bigger areas as well. It's not just a problem for islands. I'm from the South, and the ivory-billed woodpecker, or the great god bird as it's called in the swamps of the South, was kind of one of these charismatic megafaunas that kind of characterized the South in the 1800s. But because of human hunting, but also changing the environment, right? We don't really want these swamps here anymore. We're going to drain them. We have these forests. We're going to cut them down to make farms. The combination of hunting and habitat loss killed off these birds, and the last one officially was seen in the 1930s. But there's always these kind of reports. It's almost like Bigfoot or something, right? They're still out there, right? And people go out in the swamps trying to find them. And then finally, when I was a kid, I was just obsessed with Tasmanian tigers. Thylacines, I think, are super cool. They look like wolves, but they're not. They're marsupials, like a kangaroo or a koala bear. They have a pouch. And these are actually, they used to be big predators in Australia, but they were both outcompeted by human-brought pets, especially dingoes and dogs. But were also hunted, and not just like accidentally killed off, but like actively hunted to extinction because sheep ranchers in Australia thought that they were eating their sheep. And they were, but there's only a few of them versus like how much sheep do we have, right? So the economic benefits of sheep ranching were seen at the time in the late 18, early 1900s to outweigh the biodiversity loss of getting rid of a few tigers, right? And I think now things have changed, and we see this in the United States with like the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone, or the reintroduction of big and other megafauna like panthers or brown bears. That we tended to value these kind of large megafauna, especially predators, a lot more than we may have in the past when things were kind of, they put bounty of like $10 for each thylacine you bring in. Other things, while they haven't been completely extinct, have been kind of pushed to the brink. And one of the most famous in our era is the American bison, right? There used to be just millions and millions of bison thundering around the Great Plains, and whole indigenous societies, like Comanches down here in Lakota or Sioux up in the Dakotas, were basically organized around hunting these creatures, and there were just so many of them, right? That they would hunt a few of them, and it wouldn't make a difference, like in the herds of tens of millions. What happened to bison?
American settlers decided that if they get starved by Native Americans, it
Yeah.
would be easier to put off.
Yeah, because they're a society that depended entirely on bison, and so we see these kind of terrible pictures. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly the one I was thinking of. Here, I will actually share this so that online people can see it too. So we get these kind of images. This is kind of late second half of the 1800s, 1870s, probably maybe 1880s. These are all bison skulls, and these were indiscriminately killed, right? Oftentimes they weren't like eating them for food. It wasn't like a starvation thing. Oftentimes people would just like hunt them from the train and shoot them as they're rolling by. And it was not just indiscriminate, it was purposely calculated, like I said, to remove the food source of Native Americans. You're going to break the society of the Comanche or Lakota, cut off their subsistence base, so they can no longer, fight against the U.S. government. But also at the same time, you're going to transform this hunting and gathering lifestyle, this area that was primarily used by hunting and gathering by undesirable type folks, to one that was safe for white settlers to come in and do farming, do agriculture, right? And this is actually the history of this land right here. It's why Portales was settled kind of silly late, right? Like people always expected, like, oh, this is like an old timey place, but it's like 1890 or something, right? Much later than like towns and my friends in Alaska. Their towns are much older than ours, and it's kind of always surprising to people. That's because this was Comancheria, this was Comanche land with buffaloes, and was not seen as suitable for agriculture. It was too dangerous and too wild until the buffalo were removed and the Native Americans were either killed or put onto reservations. Other animals, similarly, almost driven to extinction in the American West, and probably the wolf is the major one, just like thylacines in Australia. These were seen as a threat to ranchers, or to cows and sheep that ranchers were using out here or growing. and were basically hunted to the brink of extinction. And it's only been in the last couple decades that they've been rewilded back into these places, back to parks. And there's still, even though, I think probably for most of us, we can be like, yeah, it's nice that they're putting the wolves back, right? But this is still like a contentious issue, right? Like, especially for people who live by wolves or live by areas that they're reintroducing panthers or mountain lions or stuff, right? There are still people who are like, I'd rather my dog or my kids not get taken by these things. So there is still a lot of controversy about this, but I do think that as a society, we've come increasingly to value, especially these big apex predators and the role they play in ecosystems. Other times when we talk about threats to conservation, actually, let's do this real quick. You saw in the video this metaphor of high cop, as threats, as some of the threats to conservation. Do you remember what those might be? HICOP. Habitat loss, that's an H. What's I? Hi. Invasive species, C. What about the polar bears? What's going to get them? Climate change, that's a C. O. Over harvesting, yeah, over hunting, something like that. And then P. Pollution. Yeah, and we're going to try to actually look at all these throughout the course of this lecture. We're actually going to do them in different order because we're going to do P first, right? So pollution. So a lot of times, whether when we're talking about, hunting the buffalo or wolf, that's often what we would classify as over harvesting, right? You could hunt buffalo sustainably, like your Comanche or like your Sioux, but we didn't. White settlers came in and hunted everything, right? There wasn't a chance for these things to come back, and it's only literally a miracle that we have buffaloes at all today. There were just a few of them left, oftentimes on private ranches. The XIX ranch over in Texas. There's this really fascinating. One of the very first movies were shot out there, and they actually so this is like after if you've been to Palo Duro Canyon, after the Palo Duro massacre up there, just like 10 years after that, they basically get some of the last Comanche buffalo hunters together off the reservation. They got some buffalo out there, and they're like, this is like this very early film Edison thing that they were doing, where they were like, well, we need to document the past, right? Like 10 years ago, they were intent on wiping out this culture and this society and this way of life. And 10 years later, they're like, oh, maybe we should document this, I guess, before it's going. So we can actually see what some of these hunts look like, and because of these early movies. But those ranches that kept just a few, just a couple hundred buffalo, are really the basis for the entire buffalo herds that we have today because they were reintroduced into the wild. So overharvesting is a major part of it, but oftentimes some of these losses of biodiversity are not always purposeful, right? It's not like ranchers being like, kill all those wolves, right? Oftentimes the pollution, especially like pesticides, insecticides, defoliants, fungicides, we've talked about this before in classes, in previous classes. Often these pollutants are real drivers of extinction as well. And it's not often, sometimes it can be like insecticides, like they're spraying for certain kinds of bugs, but oftentimes, like we talked about with the honeybees, this can be inadvertent, right? They can, we're spraying for one kind of pest, but it's an insecticide and it's not targeted enough, right? It can also it can kill animals and plants outright, just make them die. But it can also just make them more vulnerable to other forms of other extinction drivers, right? And this is going to be, we'll look at the case of Madagascar in just a second. But like many things in this class, if it's like, what is the cause of this species going extinct? Is it overhunting, or is it pollution? Or is it habitat loss? Or is it an invasive species? And oftentimes the answer is yes, right? It's all of it. If you have pollution, a great case of this is DDT. What is DDT besides the wrestling move? What's the actual, what is it? Do you know? Or are you also young? You don't even have to worry about DDT anymore. They got rid of it. It's great. DDT is a chemical defoliant, or a chemical that was sprayed onto plants and animals back in the 1960s or so. And it was seen as relatively safe. It was sprayed for mosquitoes. That's what it was. It was sprayed for mosquitoes, and it was often used to because like for malaria, right? We have malaria. It's a problem. Mosquitoes are gonna, transmit disease. So we're gonna spray this stuff, right? But again, it didn't just focus on mosquitoes. It affected these other animals as well, birds, especially large birds like eagles and hawks and vultures were particularly affected. And it didn't kill them outright, but it made their shell super weak, right? Instead of being like a really strong cell, it weakened the species. And it didn't kill off all the birds, right? And all the young, but it made it much harder for them. It killed off a large portion of it. And so the ones that did survive often had problems or were kind of endangered, right? And there has been efforts to stop this, right? And just kind of stopping to spray these chemicals, at least, and we can actually see that this works because in the United States, we've actually stopped spraying it, and these species like eagles have come back pretty well. Where in other countries, especially in third world countries, like in Belize, they have some real nasty chemicals that they still use down there, and you can just buy kind of over the counter. It's really unsettling, especially when you see people spraying them with like no protection, no mask, no shoes, no gloves, no nothing. A much more recent case before I was a professor in one of my previous lives, I used to be an underground cave guide, and we would go into caves and take people and show them around. One of the things that's being affected increasingly is bats, right? And this is bats are fly around and they go into fields and things, and they often pick up these chemicals and they go back to their caves and they spread this around, right? And it's caused major population die-offs, what we call white nose bat fungus, in a lot of these, especially East Coast bat colonies, right? So things that aren't even for this, right? Spraying fields in for agriculture, and the fungus gets passed on to bats, and then bats pass it, they die off. When we talk about overhunting, this can also be based on cultural preferences, and why do elephants and rhinos often get hunted? Because they're tasty? No, most of the time they don't. Yeah, about the ivory, right? And there has been, increasingly nowadays it's mostly destined for Asia. But until like the mid 20th century, most of it was also going to Europe. Everything, we have a lot of fake ivory now, but I'm of an age where I remember as a kid, you go to old grandma's house and they had a piano. I remember it actually had ivory keys, or I remember playing pool at some old guy's house one time. And the cue ball was actually like elephant ivory, it's kind of fancy. And these were often seen as kind of status symbols, right? Not everybody got to have them, so it showed that you were rich. Elephants are particularly known for this, and we kind of have seen this over time, right? This kind of poaching of elephants, but rhinos often are as well. All the horns of rhinos are often used for like ornamental daggers, but often get used for these kind of traditional medicines, especially like male fertility kind of, snake oil salesmen kind of grind this up and sell the people who maybe feel a little insecure. What do you think could be done to stop poaching? Right, because we're going to talk about what to be later, and a lot of these animals actually live within reserves already. Like one of the answers for what to do to save the rhinos or save the elephants, make a park, right? Make a park, let people not go in there, but people still go in there and they still hunt them. So what should we do? Is it a lost cause? Can we do anything to protect the elephants and the rhinos? Should we write a strongly worded letter?
A couple African countries just give you the death penalty.
Yeah, right. Well, let's take a look. Some of the hunters and the hunters who hunt them. All right, so let's watch the video on poacher hunters. What do you all think? Is it something that we should be doing? Is like having, protecting biodiversity at any cost, right? Or are human lives more important? What do you think?
At a certain point, protecting biodiversity is protecting human lives.
Yeah.
Because when the elephants all die out, we see all the time when one piece of the ecosystem goes away, the ecosystem tends to go entirely out of whack.
Yeah, and oftentimes I think that these kind of things get framed as like nature versus like, oh, somebody needs to make money for their family or something. Like, how can we stop them? But oftentimes these parks are like major economic drivers in the country, right? Like, they don't just benefit a few people, but like, Belize, we'll take a look at it in just a second. 30%, 33% of the country is parks, and people come there for the reefs and come there for the animals and the toucans and the jaguars. And if you don't have those things, you're also cutting off livelihoods for the people who work at the parks. Yeah.
And if if these poachers overhunt the elephants, well, they screw themselves over.
Definitely, like
by completely removing a source of possible income.
Yeah, right. And that's the difference between kind of sustainable harvesting, like if you're harvesting deer or something, you can take them at a rate where you're not going to run out of deer unless you really go crazy, right?
But also think, if they been given their warning, if they're going to go out there and hunt animals, they're accepting the fact that it is a risk that we've been told, hey, these animals in danger. If you are trying to do anything, you'll be arrested or, in some places, killed.
Yeah.
It's already mentioned. You've been told if you think that money is worth it, okay.
Yeah.
But this is the consequence.
Yeah, and oftentimes it gets tied up in ideas of national sovereignty, right? You see it in here. These are oftentimes militias and armies coming from other countries trying to raid it because it's a source of money. And so it's about protecting sovereignty of like, this is our country and don't come in here.
On top of the economic idea, I know that certain places, I can't remember exactly where in Africa, will do paid trophy hunts on animals they're trying to protect, where they do very small select hunts that people pay a lot of money to go to, that all of that money then goes to actually protect.
To funding conservation, right? Versus this one person kind of making all the money, right? Maybe doing it in a right way. And I think, like, I don't know what the answer is. If I did, I wouldn't be teaching this class. I'd be doing something in Washington, right? But I do think there's probably some kind of, middle ground. It's not all save every part of the entire world and make the entire world a park, but also don't just, not everything needs a dollar sign on it. Sorry, we're running a long time. We could do a whole class on elephants. I think they're really cool. But one of the other, and the HICOP acronym, the I, stands for invasive species. And oftentimes on islands especially, invasive species can be real problematic. But not just in islands, right? We saw, I'm from Florida, and there's the case of the pythons, which are released into the Everglades, eating up a lot of the native species there. But on islands, it's particularly noticeable. And we see this a lot of cases in the Indian Ocean as well as in the Pacific. Hawaii and Guam are two of the kind of hot spots. New Zealand's another one. In which these were kind of biodiversity hotspots, right? And islands often are areas with a lot of biodiversity. Why? What about an island itself, right? It specifically makes it a good candidate for a biodiversity hotspot.
Like isolation? Yeah,
right. There's not a lot of other creatures there to start with. And so when animals do get there, they form, they can evolve into new niches and speciae, right? Whether that's like in the Galapagos or Hawaii or Guam, and they see a lot of animals, especially birds, as well as kind of other creatures that live there, which are just unique either to that particular island or just kind of the nearby area. Don't have a whole big range. And like we said earlier, these species are particularly vulnerable. There's been a lot of invasive species, and sometimes they're like when we talk about the Florida, they're just saying get these giant pythons, right? And they have Python Derby in Florida, which I think is hilarious. So you get the biggest python, you can win like a prize from the state government. And oftentimes these are like what we think of with invasive species, right? That's definitely kind of big and scary. But oftentimes invasive species are things like snakes, like a little brown snake, or like a rat. Rats are some of the worst, or cats, or things like that, right? Things that we often don't think of. They're like, oh, it's a cute cat, right? But just tens of millions of dollars has been spent to eradicate rats or to eradicate cats off of these islands, right? Sailors back in the day would either bring we have a ship cat, we're just going to bring it here, or they would, inadvertently bring these things like there's rats on the ship and then they get onto these islands. And then they decimate these populations. It's almost like the dodo in that a lot of these creatures on the islands don't have any kind of natural predators, or they're not used to these things, and so are often super vulnerable when you have a highly successful predator like a rat or a cat enter the mix.
I know for more recent example, stray cats are a huge problem when it comes to the extinction of bird species.
For sure, songbirds, and that's always the argument. Like, keep your cat inside because the songbirds are getting. But like here in Portales, we got grackles. That's pretty much all we got, right? Because everything else is birded, right? Or gets birded by the cats. So we see these in some of these islands, Guam especially. You'll know Guam is. It's like kind of in the Western Pacific, big U.S. base there. Guam in particular is one of these was biodiversity hotspot, but there was introduced brown tree snake. There's a picture of it right here, which was introduced onto the island, and they're particularly deadly to the island's endemic birds. There's a lot of birds there that don't really exist either anywhere else in the world or just on those couple islands. But unfortunately for them, this snake can climb trees even with no legs, right? It climbs up in the tree, slithers right into the bird's nest, and eats their eggs. And since it's not been going on very long, right? Here's a list of birds and bats which are endemic to either Guam or the kind of nearby areas. And since the introduction during World War II of these brown snakes, just how badly they've decimated these species, right? And you can see this has happened all within a relatively short window, like 1969, 79, 82, 84, 84, 84, 85, 86, 86, 87, 88, 94, and here's the bat, 68, 72, right? This is a really brief window. We see these species living there for millions of years, but then within basically 25 years or so, the extinction of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 different bird species and 2 bat species from the island. And then we always have this thing like, well, we can reintroduce them, but like if you don't fix the underlying cause, if you can't get rid of all the snakes that you brought onto this island, adding the birds back is not necessarily going to help anything. So snakes are just going to eat them again. And islands in particular, like I said, are particularly vulnerable to this. This because they are isolated. Oftentimes these populations only live there. There's not, if you're talking about things like the Florida panther, where I'm from, right? There's only 40 Florida panthers left, but they've been able to start, and it's a problem with kind of inbreeding and loss of genetic variety, but they've been bringing panthers or mountain lions, because they're the same species, maybe a different subspecies, some they argue about this, but bringing them from out west to Florida, and then they're like, hey lady panthers, here's a guy panther from out west, so you're not all inbred. So you're able to bring those species back a little bit easier versus things on an island. Oftentimes you don't have that genetic reserve in which you can go and bring those things back, right? Oftentimes islands are pretty little. Even big islands like Madagascar are fairly big, but in terms of like continents, they're just tiny little pieces of land in the ocean, and so oftentimes don't have a whole lot of land to begin with where animals can land. And this is especially true once people start living on there, because where people often live on the best areas, right? Like if I'm going to move to an island, it's Madagascar, right? Or Hawaii. Where are we looking at? Oh, Hawaii, right? We're moving to Hawaii. People are going to be settling in the flat areas. They're going to be settling by the coast. They're not going to be building cities up on the mountains or in the harsh, the more rugged terrain. And so those become the only areas where the animals can live. And as the cities start to grow, like we see, this is Hawaii, the just literal explosion of population between the end of World War II and the end of the 20th century on Hawaii. Even people like not even thinking about like the animals there, but just kind of the building out of these cities takes away the habitat for those animals to live in. Okay, another thing that we saw in the video is the where are you? There we are. Here we go. We talked about conservation status in the video, right? And there's this whole spectrum from least concern is especially like a domesticated dog. No concern at all, right? Like dogs are here, they're fine. Domesticated cats, they're not going away. To things that have been completely wiped out, a dodo, right? Tasmanian wolf, completely gone, at least until we Jurassic Park them and bring them back. And in between, there's this whole range of, this whole scale or threatened between things that are threatened on one hand to things that are kind of, moving towards extinction. And, over here, extinction, extinct in the wild, critically threatened, endangered, vulnerable, not threatened, least concern, right? And oftentimes we have this tendency to think about this as kind of a one-way slope. Like you start out before people, there's no concern. And then as people show up, they become threatened and then we hunt them more. And then they're critically threatened and then they're extinct in the wild. We only have a few in the zoos and then they're all gone forever, like the white rhino, right? But these this is a scale that can go either way. And like I said, the alligator, American alligator, the bald eagle are often looked at as kind of success stories, right? They were critically threatened or endangered and have been brought back from the brink. That doesn't mean that they're over here in least concern. They're still vulnerable oftentimes, or they're still, we have to be careful. But there is hope, right? It's not like a slippery slope where as soon as you start to get threatened, you're invariably going to go extinct. We do have agency in this matter. And here's your scale again. But again, I think one thing that's not on the scale I just showed you is data deficient. And for a lot of these species, especially things that are newly discovered, it's often hard for scientists to have any idea of like how many there actually are, right? We go into the rainforest and we're like, we discovered a new species of bug or a new species of plant. Is it endangered? I don't know. We've never found it before. So we don't actually know how many there are. We don't know if there used to be a lot of them and now this is the last one, or if it's something that's always kind of been existing at a very small scale or is pretty rare normally, and we are not seeing a ton of change, right? So data deficient is part of the problem. We need to get more data to understand really what's going on. What I think is interesting too is that we often think of this as like a 20th century phenomenon that and it has accelerated in recent years, but really since the beginning of agriculture, the beginning of sedentism, 10,000 years ago, depending on where you're talking about in the world, that we've seen a loss of biodiversity. And like you saw in the video, some of this is animals. So like here's a great example of England. We actually have good records from England because we're kind of obsessed here in America with England, and we can see that like there is both archaeologically as well as kind of historically, like from pictures, from novels, from poems, that there were a lot of animals there that don't exist today, and we can actually see when they went extinct, right? Like 8,000 years ago, wolverines; 3,400 years ago, elk, lynx, brown bears, beavers, swine, wolf, great auks, ghost hawks, sea eagles, and muskrats, right? And oftentimes we can actually see this was, especially kind of some of these later ones, become this driver for European colonialism. We've hunted out all the beavers in Europe now, so now we're going to go to Canada or something like that, and we're going to hunt beavers there because we still really want beaver hats. But we can see how these animals go extinct, and it provides like a window into what's going on. What animals go extinct first? Based on this chart of, you read that, of England. What types of animals go extinct first? Yeah, eat, but also what kind of animals specifically? Mammals. Yeah, mammals seem to go before birds. What kind of mammals? Big ones or little ones? Big ones, yeah, right. It tends to be big animals, big mammals first. And oftentimes it's because they're like elephants or whales. They have a very low reproduction cycle, or they can't keep up with how many are being harvested. Or they're predators, things like bears or lynx, right? They don't have large populations because as like a deer or something that they're eating. So as you hunt them and as they lose that habitat, they're often much more likely to go extinct earlier. And we have kind of these birds seem to go later in smaller mammals.
But also because often they need more food too. So
yeah, they need more food, they need more habitat, or like how much area does a lion need to survive, right? They're going to need a whole area to range on, to hunt all these different deer on. So as they're much more vulnerable to this kind of loss than some other species. Oftentimes there's this this kind of cultural thing too. It's not just fun. It's not just food, but oftentimes it's sport and pastime. Here's fox hunting in England, and it was seen as like not just for food, but also as this kind of rich person pastime, a class attitude towards nature. Again, this isn't just back in the day. This is often also going on today. These are pandas. We think pandas are adorable. But again, their habitat has been steadily transformed from bamboo forests to agricultural fields over the last couple hundred years. You can even see 1800, they have a much bigger range. Now, the current distribution is that smaller circle, but really it's those little tiny red, those tiny little red dots where they exist in parks. And so we get these really impacted populations where you may be saving an animal or we're saving the species, but really it's only existing on like a tiny postage stamp of land left versus kind of this larger range. So we get this almost like token idea. And then the idea is like, we're going to save it in the genetic diversity and maybe someday we'll fix it and we'll bring them back and it's Jurassic Park. I don't know. But again, this idea of extinction is forever. So save them if you can, but oftentimes it's like a very, very limited range that's left. We have kind of big picture. We've just, done so much to the planet and the species. About 85% of the world's threatened mammals, birds, and amphibians have been lost through this transformation of the Earth's land from either primary forest or grasslands to agriculture, right? It's the same problem that the pandas are facing now. But in addition to kind of this transformation of land, we haven't gone through them all yet, but in the high cop metaphor, the sea climate change, right? This is also changing the face of the earth and affecting these species, right? Whether that's, here's this terrible bony looking polar bear up here in the Arctic, not able to go out onto the sea ice like they could before and hunt seals, right? Also kind of climate change affecting the animals that they eat. As well as things like penguins, right? Changing the temperature in the Arctic, which affects like the krill composition and things like that. Sorry, we're almost out of time. I'm trying to get to the end here. Let's go down here. Okay, so kind of the last 5 minutes, not very long, but I did want to get to this because I don't want to be sad all the time. Let's talk about what we can do, right? There are ways to protect these animals and to bring back biodiversity. And the big one that people and countries around the world have been doing is to set aside protected areas. This is where there's a whole range of these between what's known as like fortress conservation, which is like, we're going to take this area, we're going to put walls around it, we're going to actually have guys with machine guns walk around. If you go in there, they'll probably shoot you, right? To what's called mixed use areas where this is a protected area, but people are allowed to come in, either hunt or farm on there in a limited capacity, oftentimes traditional people, indigenous people, things like that, right? Because these areas have been used for a very long time, and it's sustainable if you kind of do it sustainably. And for a lot of countries, they've increasingly set aside areas as protected land. And the United States is actually doing pretty well on this, right? Compared to something like, I don't know, what's a country that's not doing so well? Uruguay in South America, or Fiji and Oceania, 3 or 5%. United States, we have 14% of our country is set aside as protected area, which I think is pretty good. But it's not really that's not the best, right? We got places like Bhutan, where it's almost 50%. Over in Asia, Japan, 30%, Belize is 30%, Botswana, where we see the elephants over there, 30%, Costa Rica is another big success story. And these not only are like I was telling you earlier, these aren't just like feel-good stories. You're like, oh, they're saving trees. But places like Costa Rica have built their entire economy around this, right? Like if you go to Costa Rica, it's probably to see some birds or go see some nature. And that doesn't work if you're just cutting it all down, right? So it's about like rethinking the economy and not seeing it as like we need to use nature in order to make money to help these people survive, but that like nature, people will actually pay money to like go see an elephant or go scuba diving with sharks or something like that. We don't have time for that video. So there are other things that we can do besides just setting kind of protected areas. We can kind of talk about bans on specific hunting techniques or practices, right? Like not using gill net lines in the ocean or not doing certain kinds of trapping or setting hunting season for only certain times of the year, right? Why might that make a difference? Yeah, let the population don't kill mama deers during calving season, right? That's going to be a problem for down the road. But you can hunt bucks in this other time of the year, right? Again, it's not like an all or nothing, but it's about managing these resources in a more efficient kind of way. And so there are these big problems, but even compared to like when I was a kid, I think that at least in terms of biodiversity, we are doing better. Like we're more aware of this. I think other bigger kind of systemic problems like climate change have come to the forefront. But in terms of like saving the elephants or saving the whales, I think that this has gone from some like, I think that's probably something most of you as, young people are on board with, right? Should we save whales and elephants and stuff, right? I think it's like we've caught up with that kind of idea, right? Of saving the charismatic megafauna. And now maybe the challenge is thinking about like saving ecosystems or saving things that aren't cute and cuddly. Like how do we save bugs or how do we save algae or krill, which may not be like, you can't put them on I had like a kid's book of like endangered species when I was a kid. Look at the tigers, look at the elephants. You can't do that with a lot of species, but they play an outsized role in maintaining these ecosystems and helping the other species survive, including us. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. I do have Lauren's transportation PowerPoint, which I just received, and I uploaded that to Canvas so you can check it out on your own before class next week when we have our test. Okay, that's it for today. Remember, on Tuesday, we'll be doing our review, and it'll be the Bell Game Show. So come here to learn the answers for the test, as well as win fabulous prizes like extra credit. So see you then.